Good afternoon, everyone. We hope you're doing well wherever you are. My name is David Gellis. I'm a reporter here at the New York Times and the corner office columnist. Today, we're glad to welcome Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, the Chief Executive Officer of Feeding America, for a conversation about this moment of extraordinary need in our country. Claire has a remarkable life story, which we'll get to soon, and she spent much of her career in corporate America, where she held several executive positions at Walmart before joining Feeding America some years ago. Today at Feeding America, she oversees a network of more than 200 food banks at what is one of the largest nonprofit organizations in the country. And as you can imagine, there has been unprecedented demand for their services in recent months. I should also add that the New York Times partners with Feeding America through the Neediest Cases Fund, our annual charitable campaign. A quick housekeeping note. You may submit questions to Claire at any time during this event using the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll get to them in a little bit. Please also note that this event is being recorded and that this is an audio-only event. Claire, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get right into it. I think by now we've all seen these harrowing photographs of cars lined up for miles at food banks around the country. Claire, can you give us a sense of just how dire the hunger crisis in America is at this moment?
Yes. It has really been unprecedented. We've talked about it in terms of a perfect storm, David. We've seen an increase in need of about 60%, though I hope the peak was at 70% increase, but right now it seems to have stabilized at about 60% increase in need. And the people who are coming to us for help, 40% of those people who are coming to us for help are people who've never before relied upon the charitable food system. And all of this in the midst of a health pandemic, which has created additional challenges around making certain that the people that we serve are safe and that those of our members who are out there on the front lines are safe as they provide that service to people. So it's been a really challenging time.
Yeah, well, there's so much in there and I want to unpack bits and pieces, but first I wonder if you could just sort of take us back in time about 4 months ago. And listen, I think no one really saw this coming. No one really had a sense of the scope of what was going to happen in this country and around the world. But could you give us a sense of how this crisis came onto your radar? Was it a sudden hit when you realized that unemployment was going to lead to more food insecurity? Or perhaps before mid-March, when so much changed so rapidly, did you start to see this coming and start to make arrangements, as it were, to deal with an anticipated spike in demand?
Yeah, so we certainly, none in the network were able to fully anticipate what was to come. But because our network, which you described well as a network of 200 food banks around the country, but I think we should also mention that the network includes an additional 60,000 meal programs around the country as well, pantries, et cetera, all around the US. So because our network covers the whole of the US and US territories, we're able to get a sense of what's happening at immediately, if you will, because we have a pulse on the whole country. And we certainly started seeing some increase in need very early on. I think an important data point to use as we talk about all of this and try to contextualize it is that we know that in the US, that even before COVID, that there were, according to USDA, 37 million people who were food insecure. We also know that there were 22 million kids who received free and reduced lunch. So when you start shutting down schools and you have children who were relying upon schools as a chief source of food, then food insecurity among children starts getting impacted nearly immediately as soon as the schools start shutting down. We also know that while 37 million accounted for the food insecure in the country, that according to the Federal Reserve Bank, that the average American does not have more than $400 cash on hand to deal with an emergency. So put those things together and you start having people in dire need very quickly. So we started seeing early reads of challenges, and then of course it just kept on growing and growing, and I hope that we've seen the peak.
Yeah, those numbers are, I think, hard for so many of us, especially those of us who look out and still have sort of the highest hopes for our country and everything it can provide to its citizens, really hard to accept. I think it's hard for so many people to understand that there really is a hunger crisis, as it were, in the United States. Can you give us a better sense of who it is that is going hungry? You know, this is not, I think we all have to realize, just homeless people and those at the absolute margins of society. For some of us, for many of us, these are our friends and neighbors in some cases.
That's absolutely true. And of course, this is a tragic event for so many reasons. So a dark cloud, if you will. But if there's a silver lining to this as it relates to food insecurity, is that I do believe that the American public has a raised consciousness around food insecurity. What I find striking is how often people have contextualized food insecurity with this pandemic, when in fact, as you've said, and as I've already given some statistics around, there are tens of millions of people in this country who have been struggling with food insecurity, some of them in generational terms for a very, very, very long time. So what does food insecurity look like in the United States? So first, the USDA has a technical definition of food insecurity, which is a lack of access to enough food for an active, healthy life. And when we think about the American dream, which many, many people do realize, we don't contemplate that here in this country. And one of the statistics I often use is the fact that pre-COVID, we had data that would suggest that we were throwing away 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food every year, not counting household waste. It's hard to reconcile that in a country that throws so much away, that has so much, that there would be people who are in fact living and struggling with food insecurity. So we have an image of someone who's food insecure as people who are homeless. Of course, there's food insecurity among people that are homeless, but we don't conceive that there are people who have full-time jobs, some of them with more than one full-time job, who are still food insecure. And that was true before the pandemic. That's certainly true now. Now, when you add on top of that, the fact that there certainly is a relationship between rising unemployment and food insecurity, especially for that 40% who have never before relied on the charitable food system, well, then you have that on top of the challenges that so many people confronted before.
It's a sobering set of statistics, but we're glad you're out there trying to bring what is needed to those in need. A reminder, we're speaking with Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, the Chief Executive of Feeding America. You can ask Claire questions directly through the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll get to those in a little bit. Claire, could you give us a sense of the demographics of the hunger crisis, or the food insecurity crisis, as you call it? We know that COVID and this unemployment crisis have disproportionately hit and affected people of color. Is that also the case with hunger?
That absolutely is the case with hunger. And I think more than one important thing to talk about here. One is the fact that there were 37 million people who were identified as food insecure. Of that, about 50% were white, about 23% Black, about 24% Hispanic. So almost 50% of people who were food insecure before COVID were people of color. That is inordinate when you contemplate the percentage of the overall US population that are people of color. For Blacks, that would be closer to 12%. For the Hispanic Latinx population, that would be 17%. So there definitely has been an inordinate impact on communities of color. And then inside of COVID, one of the things that was hidden in plain sight for a very long time, and I think we now have, as a country, have raised awareness around as well, is that the comorbidities that were being flagged as making you more vulnerable to this disease, we've long known that those comorbidities are inordinately impacting communities of color as well. So when I first started hearing about it, I was alarmed because I knew that this community of people who are food insecure that I am committed to serving were going to be inordinately impacted in multiple ways by this crisis, this pandemic.
Well, I want to very quickly pivot to your response, but lastly, and I think it's so important just to understand the scale and the depth of the food insecurity problem. Lastly, can you just talk to us about the degree to which, and you just looked at it in that last answer, that hunger is not an isolated problem. It can lead to this whole host of other challenges, complicating education, other health issues, mental well-being. Talk about why food insecurity is such or food security rather, is such a bedrock need that we need to make sure is met to ensure, quality of life across so many other aspects as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that question as well. And I've actually had a number of conversations with people as I embarked upon this work. And among those conversations, I've discussed with people their passions. And as an example, I'll have someone talk to me about having a strong passion around fiscal responsibility and making certain that we are being good stewards of money, of the public trust, if you will. Well, food insecurity has a significantly negative impact on the fiscal health of our country. So those people who are highly, I guess it's a pun, highly invested in that fiscal health ought to be highly invested in being a part of the solutions around food insecurity. If, for instance, you have medical outcomes for children, if that's something that's very important to you, there's so much data that talks about the fact that there's a direct correlation between food insecurity and medical outcomes for children and for adults, for that matter. If instead you're very focused on education, again, a lot of data that informs my view that someone who's interested in educational outcomes, if you want to have meaningful progress for educational outcomes for our society, then we're going to have to confront food insecurity because there are direct implications there as well. So I can't think of anything that matters that doesn't, and any achievement that we want for our country that would not be made better and more likely that positive if we were to get really serious about addressing food insecurity in this country. It has so many, when people are secure in their ability to and have consistent, predictable access to a nutritious mix of food, there's so many positive things that flow from that. When they do, there's so many negative things that flow from it. So now we've well established the need and we've well established the importance. Talk to us about the degree to which other Americans, the community, the government perhaps, has been helping you match this record demand. The fundraising environment for so many nonprofits has become extremely challenging. Just today I was on the phone with the CEO of another nonprofit who honestly doesn't know if they will still be in business next year, as it were. But have people been stepping up to contribute to Feeding America and giving you the resources you need to meet this spike in demand? People absolutely have been stepping up. And if you'll allow me, there's more than one aspect of what you just said that I'd love to be able to address. So first, yes, we've seen an incredible outpouring of support across the board, from individuals to corporations. We've had meaningful partnerships with the USDA in relaxing certain regulations that might have made sense before COVID, but absolutely don't during COVID. We've had Congress has acted to be helpful, but I do need to underscore that while, and that network that I'm a part of, by the way, let me not go too far without acknowledging, these are extraordinary, extraordinary people who are mission driven and highly effective in delivering food to people who need them, especially when at times like this. So they were standing ready to be helpful, and they've really delivered. So one point of progress, and then I want to talk about other nonprofits in just a second, but one point of progress is, for instance, that between March the 1st and May 24th, as a result of that outpouring of support and this remarkable network that I get to be affiliated with, we provided 1.3 billion meals. 1.3 billion meals. In a year, we generally, last year, for instance, we provided 4.5 billion meals in a year. Now, the unfortunate part of the story is that we partnered with remarkable organizations like McKinsey, for instance, and our data shows us that the gap, the meal gap over the course of the next 12 months is going to be 8 billion meals. So there's still a huge need. So I want to honor the investments that have been made and that outpouring of support. But I've got to tell you, this is a marathon, not a sprint. There's more need out there. We're going to need more need in order to provide that food. But now I want to go to the other point that you were making about other nonprofits. Before, I believe there were 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States. And there's so many nonprofits that are struggling for their very survival. And when we think about a crisis like this, I hope that those who are listening and that the American public at large doesn't think about it as a transaction, right? As we need to provide food. And once we've provided that meal, we can say, job well done, and walk away. These other nonprofits are vital to the ultimate recovery for people facing hunger, because David, you mentioned it before. This is not, food insecurity is a symptom of deeper challenges around poverty, right? Around a lack of access in this country.
Absolutely.
Around, and we have to be a part. Feeding America aspires to be, and I know there are members in our network who in fact are, people who work on not only providing food, which is absolutely critical, indispensable, but also helping to others to be empowered to elevate out of food insecurity in a sustainable way. There's no way Feeding America and our network can do that alone. We need continued help to provide food. People facing hunger need help that includes food, that goes far beyond it. So I hope that where people have passions for other profit work, that they continue to make investments in that work. And the American public has proven itself to be the most generous country on the whole planet, is America, the most generous. If I may, I'll say, what we do tend to lose focus sometimes. And so when we see a parking lot that's filled with cars, I'm glad that that's evocative in us of, I've got to do something to help. I'm so glad. But the reality is that the day will come when the cars won't be in the parking lot, or not all at one time, or when you have a 3-mile-long line waiting in Pittsburgh to go to a food distribution. But the need will still be there. It's just going to go inside of the buildings. And it's going to trickle inside of the buildings. And I hope that we will be able to retain the attention of the American public when those lines go inside of buildings. And I hope that we will gather resources and invest in other nonprofits as well, who will be there to help people to elevate out of all of those reasons, that panoply of reasons why they find themselves in the situation that they're in.
Well, you mentioned the generosity, and of course, I believe it was just this month you received what I believe may have been the single largest gift in the organization's history, a $100 million contribution from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. Tell us how that gift came about, and what do you do when you receive $100 million?
Wow, it was a good problem to have, David, I will have to tell you. And I won't get into too many of the details of exactly how it happened, other than to say this. So I was surprised by the opportunity and delighted to help Mr. Bezos and his team to understand why they should make a bet that the Feeding America Network was going to be uniquely positioned to provide value to people facing hunger if they made that investment. It was, I think, a combination of things gave rise to even the question of whether that investment would be made through Feeding America. I think one of them was that you can't deny the need when you see a parking lot with 10,000 families represented for one food distribution. I think that raised visibility was part of it. I think American generosity was part of it. I'm confident that the track record of delivering value to communities that the network that I'm affiliated with has was a large part of it. So what did we do? So Mr. Bezos didn't have a lot of preconditions on his contribution, other than that he needed to have confidence that the organization in whom he would make the investment was well positioned to deliver value to people with a sense of urgency. So we have inside of Feeding America, we actually have a representative body called the NAC, and that NAC is an elected group that comes out of our membership. So
and what is a NAC? I'm sorry, explain that acronym for us.
So it's a network council. It has had more than one iteration, but we affectionately refer to it as the NAC, the NAC. Okay. But at its core, what it is, it's a group of members among our 200 who are elected by other members to help to represent the interests of the membership with the national office. So the national office then doesn't have to speculate as much about where the needs are, how it is we might implement a program like this. We have remarkable partners in the NAC with whom we ideated around what's the best way for us to make certain that the money gets to where it needs to go in a way that's consistent with the spirit of the gift from Mr. Bezos. So we did that very quickly. And then we have inside of our organization, we have a grants team, and we started deploying the resources. And I'm sure that not only was that the largest gift that we've ever received, but I'm sure we broke records in terms of how quickly we got that money into the front lines. Something that Feeding America committed to do at the beginning of this pandemic was we dedicated a fund, which we refer to as our COVID-19 fund. And with that fund, we provided seed money from the national office. The first penny that went into it was a national office penny. And we committed that every bit of the money that goes into our COVID-19 response fund would make its way into local communities. That we would not extract not one dime of administrative costs, although there certainly are costs associated with running the national office, but we did not. And the public has really responded, because I think part of the challenge in a situation like this is you have so many people who really want to help, and they have to trust some place to make their investments. And that's the way I view every gift, that $100 million gift. But I also think about gifts from young people who some of whom I learn about, who break their piggy banks and give us $2 or $3. Part of what I get to do in this work is I get to sometimes, when I'm lucky, get to see the faces of young people who, some of whom gather maybe $250 and send it in to Feeding America to help. So I think having that, I'd like to believe that we even heightened our credibility with people who wanted to give by making it clear to them that they would not be giving to Feeding America National Office through COVID-19. They'd be giving to people facing hunger directly as a result of what they did. So that's what we're doing. Now we're looking to what does the pivot look like? So although the need continues, we still have this heightened need. We have to be thoughtful about what the mid and long-term implications are for this crisis. We know, David, that from the last great recession, it took 10 years to return to pre-recession rates of food insecurity. 10 years. Now, we hope that's not going to happen this time, but we have to plan for it. So what are we going to do mid and long term to address some of the real long-term challenges that people are going to confront? So that's how we're pivoting even our COVID-19 fund. We're continuing to commit that we're not going to take any administrative cost out of it, but we're also saying that we're going to be looking not just at the immediate provision of food, but also what's the mid and long-term need that we're going to be addressing through this fund.
Well, that's good. Though it bears repeating that nonprofits do need unrestricted funds to keep the lights on. So don't let everyone just donate to the COVID fund. You gotta keep everyone gainfully employed at the same time. Listen, Claire, we cannot let this conversation go by without talking a bit about your personal history. Can you just tell us a little bit about the remarkable circumstances of your upbringing? I mean, by some accounts, you have upwards of 100 brothers and sisters. I know that's a term of art, but tell us, where did you grow up? What was it like?
Sure. So I think I told you, David, in a previous conversation that we had, that I've been asked the question about how many brothers and sisters you have. And when I hesitate, I even had a moderator on a panel say, well, that was supposed to be the softball. But in our family, it's a nuanced answer is the only thing that's appropriate. So I was taught, so before I was born, I was born into a family that is rather unique in many, many ways. And among the ways that we were unique is that the inordinate number of my siblings came to us not through biology. So through birth, adoption, and foster care, I am one of over 100 children. So having been brought, my grandparents on both sides were sharecroppers. Neither of my parents graduated even from high school. So I grew up in an environment where I understood so keenly that not everybody gets dealt the same hand. That due to no fault of their own, that so many of my siblings had significant challenges to overcome. And I witnessed how my parents, through their dedication and their commitment to others, even without a lot of educational sophistication, although, by the way, for the record, my mom and dad are two of the smartest people I've ever known, but through dedicated work, they were able to make a meaningful impact on the lives of other people, including me. So it was through that modeling and that example that I learned things that I know that lots of people in the United States continue to struggle with. I learned, for instance, that hunger is in the United States. I've always known it. I never have a recollection of not knowing it. I have most of my siblings who joined my family throughout the course of my childhood. They came into our family having been malnourished. And I actually mean many, many of them were in fact malnourished in the United States of America. Most of them were food insecure before they joined our family. So I witnessed firsthand the devastating implications of a lack of access to a nutritious mix of food on a child. I also witnessed the restorative powers of food on their bodies and their spirits as well. So I bring all of that into the moment that I'm in right now, along with an understanding about how powerful diversity is in a family too. We had a family that was diverse in every aspect that you can imagine. So I didn't grow up with some of the things I started learning other people were having to address later in life, right? I always knew
Yeah.
about how powerful it is to have people with different backgrounds and experiences addressing big issues, right? So I'd like to think that I brought that knowledge and awareness into my work also.
And of those, again, sort of it's an unfathomable number for most people, but of your many siblings, as it were, I have to imagine that not all have been as successful professionally as you've had the opportunity to be. And it raises the question, in your estimation, what allowed
Have I lost you, David? I believe we lost David's sound, but I will just try to quickly respond to what I believe David was starting to answer, which was what allowed me to experience the success that I have when so many members of my family did not have the same outcomes. And I will tell you that I believe that the fact that I have so many brothers and sisters who join our family suffering from the ravages of food insecurity so early in their lives, that it put them in a position from which they were never able to fully overcome. The inordinate number of my siblings, in fact, had some form of physical, emotional, learning challenges that I didn't have. So, and I do believe it buoyed me, by the way, David, in when something was not going as I'd like, or I was in the middle of something that was hard, and when I was inclined to give up, all I had to do was think about one of my siblings who had completely different set of cards that were dealt to him or her to remind me of the remarkable privileges that I had. Now, we were not wealthy, and I wouldn't say that the schools that I was privy to would be blue ribbon schools necessarily when I was growing up, but I definitely was conditioned to make the best of what I had, knowing that there were so many people who didn't have what I did.
Okay, well, an inspiration to so many. Listen, we still have to get to reader questions, but I have one last one, and then we'll do a sort of a lightning round for reader questions. But you had come so far at Walmart, a series of really profound executive roles, and it begs the question: why leave such a place of prominence in corporate America to join Feeding America? What was behind that decision?
So I'm going to try to make it brief. If I had to say it in a word, I'd say cancer. But let me unpack that, because I don't think it's only cancer. So in 2015, when I was in the best shape of my life, I learned that I had cancer. I was at Walmart. I was in Bentonville, Arkansas. I was doing very well professionally. But I'd been walking around all my life with the knowledge that I just alluded to in the previous question, knowing about issues and challenges. When I started out, I was going to be a lawyer, but it wasn't so that I'd become a tax lawyer. And then from being a tax lawyer, becoming a corporate lawyer, and then working in law firms, and then at Walmart, my aspiration for myself was that I was going to be a children's rights advocate. And the opportunities that presented themselves were not that one. And I had, up until very recently, I I'd apologize for having been so late to doing this work. But I realized without having all of those experiences that I had before, I wouldn't be as positioned as I am today to do what I'm trying to get done in the work that I'm doing right now. So I asked myself, I've told it to others, and I'll repeat, I think it bears repeating, that after I got through it, I'd gone through my surgeries, my chemo, my prognosis was great. I had a conversation with myself and I asked an important question, which was, what if the last thing that you ever get to do professionally is the last thing that you might possibly do at Walmart? Would that be okay? And my answer was no.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, here you are, and I'm sure many people indeed are glad to have you here, and we're glad you have your health as well. Let's do some audience questions. Claire, Liz asks, what is one thing you know now about needs during the pandemic that you wish you'd known when this all started?
What is the one thing?
Maybe reframe slightly. What is the acute need you wish you had been able to anticipate, which would have better positioned the organization to respond even more effectively, perhaps?
Right. So I honestly, what's happening, other than the volume, was predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't so much that there was something that I didn't know. Of course, there are lots of things I don't know about solving problems and challenges, but the complexity of the challenges, the inordinate impact of food insecurity, and social determinants of health, how those challenges confront communities of color. I knew those things before this pandemic struck.
Right.
What I wish I could have done, I wish I would have had the wherewithal to help the American public to know it.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had been able to catalyze the American public into action in ways that would have been more sustainable, that would have allowed people the type of security that they would have needed to not be right there on the precipice in the way that so many people were, that I knew were. So I knew there were tens of thousands of additional people who were not in that 37 million, but who were right on the brink of it, barely teeter-tottering on the brink of it. And I wish that I had had the wherewithal to help the American public to understand that better, because I do believe in, and I'm highly optimistic about what the American public does when it understands a problem.
Right.
But the American public was oblivious to that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this is somewhat related, but Lauren asks, and you alluded to this earlier, Lauren asks, what are ways that we can rethink the current food supply chain to reduce the amount of waste? You, again, used that statistic of so much food being just thrown away every year, which I think is maddening to so many people. What are your solutions, practical ways we can stop that from happening and get some of that food to the people in need?
Yeah. So I think that at the beginning and end of the day, what people tend to do is what they believe to be in their interest. And that, I think on the surface, that might seem mercurial, and I don't mean it that way. Many people are motivated by other than money, right? By money plus. Mm-hmm. So I think it's that we haven't incentivized people in this country to not throw the food away. We make it hard sometimes. We have regulations in place that might be well-meaning when they started, but that are barriers to people actually being able to contribute the food that they do have to people who need it so desperately. Mm-hmm. We have not incentivized these remarkably bright technicians, people in the technology space, to work on thorny issues like this one, right? Like matching up food with people who need it the most. Now, we're seeing a lot more of that as a result of this crisis. But I think we're going to need to do more and more. One of the most elegant solutions out there is the fact that for the Department of Agriculture works with Congress, and we come up every 5 years with this structure that's designed to have farmers and people who are in need of food. The SNAP program often is what people think about it as, formerly known as food stamps, that it is only through working together that both get what they need. So there's this embedded incentive structure in there. And I think we need to rethink overall the incentives. So I've had people talk about playbooks, and I say, rather than trying to rewrite the old one, it wasn't that good, David. Why don't we throw the old one away and write a new one that's better?
Right.
And I think that includes some partnerships with we're getting started on some of those partnerships, but we need to incentivize that so that it's in everybody's interest for us to move forward and make progress.
Right. Well, you just mentioned SNAP and food stamps, and a listener asked, do you think the charitable food system in this country is capable of responding to the needs? They want to hear your thoughts specifically on the role and the efficacy of SNAP, WIC, and the federal government.
So first, short answer, absolutely not. The charitable food system, though we've got yeomen out there who are doing remarkable work, but the richest country in the history of civilization should not desire to have that many people have to rely upon the charitable food system in order to get a consistent access to nutritious food, no matter how great the charitable food system is. That is not the ideal, not for any of us who are in this work. So there is a remarkably important role for the federal nutrition program to play, and it has played. So I'll give you one aspect. Let's talk about SNAP because I'm more familiar, but absolutely WIC, it applies to WIC as well. It's usually true with these federal nutrition programs that there are lots of good reasons to invest more in them. And I scratch my head on, so why don't we? Somehow, some of these things become politicized, and I don't understand why. And sometimes it's just no good reason. Let's take SNAP. SNAP. For every one meal that we are able to provide in the charitable food system, SNAP can provide 9. So when you're thinking about the risk associated with right now coming to a food distribution, you've got some health risk that you have to think about. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and there are people who have no place else to go but to a food distribution at a food bank. Now, our food bankers are going to be there when they're needed, but our society should say we shouldn't need them to do that, right? So absolutely, I would say let's invest more. Let's think about how to make our federal nutrition program more robust. Let's talk about things like benefits cliffs, where I don't think anyone really intended for them to work the way that they sometimes do. But there sometimes are incentives for not making progress. We should revisit. That's when I say throw away the old playbook and let's create a new one. It absolutely includes as a critical element the federal nutrition program. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you're alluding to things. I mean, you're what I just heard was a wholesale rewriting of the Farm Bill and a whole lot more in terms of the way we subsidize food production in this country. But that, alas, is going to have to be saved for a different conversation. I hope everyone today has understood, thanks to Claire, the depth of the problem facing this country when it comes to food insecurity and the degree to which Feeding America and its associates are trying hard to meet that need. So thank you, Claire, so much for your work and for joining us on this call.
Thank you so much, David, for allowing us this opportunity. Every time I get invited, I know it's not Claire that you're really inviting. It's a network that's out there on the front lines, bringing value to people facing hunger. And I'm so proud to be their ambassador. So thank you very much.
And thank you to all of those who joined us listening in on this call. To find out more about the New York Times' full slate of digital events, including the next installment of Corner Office Live, please visit timesevents.nytimes.com. Next week, on Tuesday, June 30th, at this same time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, I'll be joined by Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch to talk about the future of museums and much more. And please, subscribe to the New York Times. It's the support of listeners and readers like you that makes our reporting possible. We'll look forward to speaking with you again, and thank you all so much. Have a good day.